Good for you.
Iran has closed the Strait of Hormuz and expected to burn every single ship that passes through the strait. There are massive oil shortages. Qatar has had to shut down its LNG terminal, which is a fifth of all LNG in the world. Every single day, if it does not go through, every single one of these countries loses billions of dollars. Only about a quarter of crude that currently exists can be rerouted through pipelines in Saudi. So this is the primary mechanism by which people in these countries get access to money. Who are these countries? They are small petrostates run by really wealthy plutocrats that care a ton about stability. They care a lot about the wealthy investors in these areas that are expats that are really, really afraid. There are huge degrees of investor shock because of the context of frozen trade. The degree to which there are shortages now has meant that there is so much more cost of oil. I think it has gone up like 20 or 30% in the last week. These things are horrible. What is our model? One, the GCC has military reserves pre-existing from each of these countries. We're just going to put up big warships and fight. Two, the GCC has a lot of money. We think all of these countries all have collective incentives to make sure that this gets done well and that it actually succeeds because they make an attempt. So they're likely to put in a lot of money to make sure that this works effectively. Three, the US will almost certainly work with you. They shot a torpedo for the first time since the Vietnam War when they sunk the Iranian warship off of Sri Lanka. You certainly have a lot of leverage over them now. They've involved you in this war, and they're highly likely to get involved in this case. Four, we just have to attempt permanent control right now. Obviously, in the very longest term, if it doesn't work out and it makes more sense for you to give up control or gain royalties for something, that's fine. We think there are ways to transition that later. But for now, you are attempting permanent control, and we think that attempt is good. Final thing I want to talk about, this is a long-term thing. It's not just a short-term shock. The strait got closed for weeks during COVID and fucked over all of these economies. These are the countries that are most heavily reliant and are sworn enemies of the Iranian state due to the huge divisions via the sects of Islam they rely upon. We think the highly uncertain nature of the Strait of Hormuz, especially over the last 5 years, is particularly why we need to attempt permanent control rather than temporary control. And it is going to be important for investors who have lived to see this over and over again and are investing in oil in these regions to be able to have the certainty that they are going to succeed. There is huge amounts of capital flight right now to attract those investors back to assure them you just do need control. Why is this going to work? One, you're collectively much more powerful than Iran alone. The first thing to observe is that straits, by the nature of being straits, are pretty small things. So, when you have big warships that go in, they can sort of just like overtake the Iranian ships here. They're small, so you don't need that many resources to control the land or the water. You just do not need to be able to take a Navy armada and put them in these regions. A couple of warships are probably going to do the job for you because there are narrow entrances in and out, and the big shipping tankers themselves are big. So you're able to control who goes in and out relatively easily. There's already pre-invested infrastructure. You probably looked into this before. You're so reliant on this yourself, which means that you probably made up and drawn these plans decades before. Secondly, the way that you control these straits is just heavily dependent on the grade of military technology. These countries have eons and eons and eons of it because they've been engaging armed weapons and military sales with the United States and Russia, doing intelligence collection with them, etc., for many, many years. Iran is actually chronically underinvested in their navy and security here. And keep closing the strait anytime anything gets too controversial or complicated. So you just haven't built up the defenses necessary for it. And they're also too busy worrying about aerial strikes from drones and not about all the nuclear shit that the US knew about a couple months ago. So they haven't built up the defenses necessary to collectively prevent against a huge strategy that you're engaging. They're super shocked right now because they expected the Khomeini regime to be relatively stable. They certainly do not expect the United States to come in and bin Laden Khomeini, which means that they just are not likely to engage in, are not likely to be prepared for this form of attack. This is especially true given that Iran is fighting a divided battle. There are too many firing shaheeds out of random US military bases in places like the UAE. They're lifting missiles every single day and are spending billions on missile interceptors. That's estimates, but maybe a week longer before they run out. And even if the US has some application in Iran, they have so many missiles around the world they can just fucking take them and start missiling them again. This is also particularly true given that there's not a very clear leadership structure that now the Khomeini is set. Many other of these are also rumored dead. So a lot of the internal hierarchy and bureaucracy itself has created power vacuums, and it's unclear what reserves they have ship that goes through the relatively narrow strait. But they're not going to be able to defend against the form of attack we are discussing, which is just overwhelming military force against a much bigger power by the United States and all of these Gulf countries combined. We think this is likely to be effective. Go ahead.
You are correct that there are US bases in the region. Can you tell me why these countries specifically have the naval power required to do this, given they have never fought a naval battle in their history?
So I think that they're likely to be able to do this. One, for all the reasons we gave to you as to why they'd likely pre-prepare and try to plan this before, and they're seizing the opportunity that they have now, which they view Iran this week. This is not the first time they thought, geez, guys, I think the Strait of Hormuz might be pretty nice to control. And obviously, it's one of the most relevant and lucrative trading routes that has ever existed. I think all of these countries do want control, have wanted control, and have likely invested in military capacity to do this preemptively, which is the argument that we made above if you had listened. Thirdly, even if you don't succeed, this is good for you to do regardless. We think that there are other actors who are likely to try and gain seize control for all the reasons that's why Iran is perceived as weak right now. For instance, China is heavily reliant upon trade through the Strait of Hormuz for everything that they do as well. It is much worse for you if China comes in, blows through its navy, and tries and gets into this territory themselves and engages in control. So the actor to try and control the strait. And that's really good for you because it deters other actors from attempting to do that in the first place. They're much more likely to work with you and make deals with you to get some degree of the royalties and probably give you some assistance to make sure it happens, rather than trying to do it themselves and capturing all of the benefits. To tourist action, you actually probably get some benefit from it. Which is good for you for the purposes of getting invited. The US is going to be super happy that you're cooperating and rewarding you handsomely for this. And that means you're likely to get a lot of investor confidence as well. Companies who work with the Gulf are going to make sure if this occurs. It signals investor certainty, particularly when there's so much risk and time to assist. Right now, when the Palm Jumeirah Hotel gets bombed, it's important to reassure people that you are doing something about it. And this is precisely the kind of thing we think helps.
I would like to thank the speaker for her fine speech, and I welcome the leader of opposition.
I spent 2 long years in the Singaporean Navy defending the rule of law in international waters. Because the rule of law in international waters is not just the lifeblood of small maritime nations like Singapore, but the lifeblood of the world economy. Today, I'm happy to continue that mission. Inside opposition. The counterfactual, I think, is quite obvious. It's just like probably a joint US-led operation to clear the Strait of Hormuz from Iranian influence, but then afterwards placing it back as international waters in which the rule of law orders and there's no particular control or monopoly over the area. We think this counterfactual is just likely for 2 reasons. Like A, it's highly likely given that the US presence in the area is already existent because of recent events, but also that there are huge incentives to do this that I'll explain later on. But secondly, like just intuitively, like this is probably what's going to happen anyway. Like the US is not going to let the Strait of Hormuz be continued to control by Iran. So some form of US intervention to return these international waters to free flow and passage is probably going to happen anyway. What are the 2 arguments I'm going to present to you today? Firstly, I'm going to explain why the attempt is likely to fail, because the motion says you will attempt, not that you will succeed. But secondly, I'm going to explain to you why even if you succeed, that's still a really bad thing. Right? Why does this attempt fail? This attempt fails for several reasons. The first reason is that it invites very powerful as well as adversarial adversaries to fuck with you. It looks like Iran, looks like Israel, because it's clear tangible incentive to not want your greatest rival in the region to control an incredibly important strait that controls just not the economic flow of like oil and gas, which is important for like oil and gas power plants, but also has downstream impacts on the economy for these Gulf nations, but also for the world economy as large. So it's a huge incentive here. But I want to note here that even if there's no tangible incentive, the perception of Iranian control, the perception of Gulf control, the perception of control from Saudi Arabia, for example, is sufficient. Look at the terrible state of tension that the Gulf is currently in. Look at the knee-jerk reactions that come out from Israel the moment it feels threatened, even if the threat is not real at all. So just the perception of threat, even if the threat does not actually materialize, is sufficient to invite this sort of backlash, and sufficient to feel regional tensions. I know that Opening government spends a substantial amount of time explaining the military context of like Iran and stuff like that. Like, I want to note two things here. The first thing I want to note here is that this skips a logical gap in how this policy is likely to be implemented. Because they explain to us the military feasibility of this particular thing, but they don't explain to us how we will politically reach an agreement on how to implement a military interface, how we implement like decision-making processes to control like what we actually do in the Strait of Hormuz, who actually deploys in the Strait of Hormuz, who gets to control what regulations and taxes and different restrictions that we place on ships. What is decision-making, not just the actual policy, but the decision-making processes that shape the policy need to be determined before we can implement it. The OG skipped that logical gap. But the thing I want to note here, not NCO but POI, was that like, I want to note here that a lot of the capacity they explain in comparison to the capacity of Iran is reliant on US support and funding. Not just direct US intervention, but also things like US sending you weapons, US providing you intelligence support, US providing you advisors, for example. So in many ways, they're highly reliant on the US. The next thing I'm going to explain to you that is that this will not be supported by the US. It's likely to involve restrictions on passage and control over not just the Strait of Hormuz, but also allows you to control like nearby areas, right? Because if you place artillery in the Strait of Hormuz, you can also fire at nearby areas, things like that. So it's just not just about Hormuz, it's about the areas surrounding Hormuz, right? But the second I'll note here is that even if the US is involved as a secondary player under their policy, i.e. the GCC will cooperate with the US to maintain control over the Strait of Hormuz, this is still not a policy that's acceptable to the US. Because the current state of US politics means that the Republican Party, as well as many politicians in general, even Democrats, see politics as zero sum. They see themselves as if they are not the secondary player, they are losing out. They are not going to be happy to play second fiddle to the GCC states in the control of the Strait of Hormuz. This is the precise reason why the US want to fuck up Greenland, because like even though obviously the US and the European Union are allied against Russia and the other axis of evils in the world, the US is not happy that they are the ones in control. They are not the ones leading. They are not the ones in full proper control, even if they're still involved. So US doesn't just want to be involved. US wants to be the lead player. OG deprives them of that lead player role and therefore invites US backlash and US taking themselves out of it. This is a bad thing. It's not just a bad thing because the US likes you less, it's probably bad for the economy. It's a bad thing because the US deprives you of that military, logistical, intelligence support that's necessary to run the control of the Strait of Hormuz in the first place. So it robs you of the capacity to do so, right? And for all the reasons that probably CEO is going to POI again later, I'm not going to explain too much here. But the only thing I want to explain here is that the GCC is incredibly politically fractured. It's incredibly high stakes. This is a very high stakes project, right? The Strait of Hormuz controls not just the oil exports, but the entire economy, which is highly reliant on oil exports. It controls the regional stability, which is vital to investor confidence within the GCC area. It's really important. This means that many individuals within the government are not going to be likely to compromise. They want to get their full foot in because this is that important. But the next thing I know is that there's a history of conflict and divergent views among even GCC states. Look how some of them are actually slightly divided over Israel. Some are slightly closer, some are slightly less close to Israel. They are also divided. Like a bunch of Gulf states recently got like sanctioned or blockaded. I think it's Bahrain and Qatar. I'm not really sure. I'm very sorry, but I'm just explaining to you that oftentimes their interests diverge, and oftentimes they are willing to take action against each other in the instances in which their interests diverge. This is probably really bad. It feeds into analysis earlier in my speech. I'll take one of those.
Yeah, so your point is that you're going to have strong adversaries like Iran fight you, but you counter-model a joint US operation. So how is this exclusive?
Yeah, the exclusive part is that on our side, we have the US support. On their side, the US is unlikely to support you for the reason that I explained earlier on about why the US is not happy to be a junior partner within the force, right? Next thing I'm going to explain to you is that GCC is, and also the second distinction here is that we return the straits to international control afterwards. They don't. That's the second important distinction. That's why, so even if we have tension now in the initial reclaiming period, we have tension forever as long as they control it. So next on why the GCC is politically fractured, right? So that's why the GCC is politically fractured. If they fail, this inflames regional tensions. Things like Israel, Iran, maybe even Egypt see this as a hostile takeover of a valuable as well as highly proximate strategic space. Russia probably will not be happy with this as well because some of that oil also flows through Hormuz. China sees it as a hard sell because the trade of Hormuz is also important for oil and gas. It weakens not just the economy but also the geopolitical standing of these Gulf states. Even if it succeeds, it drives away all demand in the long term. In the short term, perhaps it secures better oil demand because it's more stable, but in the long term, you want to diversify away from GCC oil because you know that oil is completely monopolized by just a small cartel. It does things like accelerate the green transition, taking away oil in the first place. It means that you look at other oil supplies instead of the GCC, and so even in the short term, it's good, it fucks over GCC in the long term.
I'd like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the Deputy Prime Minister. Hear, hear. Yep, yes.
2 points of clock. First, I want to point to three ridiculous things they said. First, they say the counterfactual is a joint U.S. thing that you guys are just fine with, which is just gov, but let the U.S. have it. I don't know why that's like the counterfactual for 4 reasons. First, it's really unclear why it is that in the world where the U.S. takes in the countries who are like afraid that the U.S. is going to extort them or give them bad deals are just going to let the U.S. have it. We have a coordinated effort on our side of the house, but it doesn't mean that MBS just sticks his thumb up his ass on their side of the house. 2, it's likely that there's going to be a power vacuum here where, oh, I don't know, China, the largest buyer of oil, is not going to be happy with this, which A, is a mechanism we'll get later to explain why it is that you're able to do this, but B, suggests the U.S. isn't just going to absorb this on their side of the house. But secondarily, that's playing very nicely with LO, because that's if their counterfactual exists bad. Very unclear why that's their counterfactual, given that the status quo of the U.S. is not one where they're just all in on doing forever wars. Like, they think the GCC doesn't have aligned incentives. Look at the fact that Nick fucking Fuentes is like, no more forever wars, guys. I'm voting Democrats. The alt-right is built on wanting to recede from taking over things. And these guys think that the U.S. is the largest land grab it's done since the Louisiana Purchase. Gap real. Second, they think there's a gap in how this is going to be done. Oh my God, guys, how are the GCC going to agree on things? Sometimes they disagree on shit. 4 responses. 1, sometimes interests diverge, but in this case they don't, because not of them that the economists take right over, and in every fucking single country there is all of them want things to go through. I don't know which country's like, we should do a $10 toll. No, it should be free. Give me a fucking example in deal over time when one of them will say, no, we don't want you to go through the Strait of Hormuz, and the other times they do. That's 1. 2, guys, it's an absolute. We have fucking FIA. They're just going to work together. 3, the GCC has an internal organization of rules that is 10 times longer than the WUDC constitution. You traded this person, we don't want to do this. 7, oligopolistic, because they work together, because they know that when they compete against each other, there's a prison dilemma. They fucking thought of it already. If you think that they're going to fight each other, they know that's going to happen. But 4, even if they have different incentives, like, fine, I'm willing to concede in the worst case and still win. Well, this isn't concession, but it's an even if. Like, UAE and Saudi Arabia just throw their big dick around and say, you're going to do what we want. Like, fine, like, what are Bahrain and Kuwait going to do? Like, who gives a shit? Like, what happens there? And they just run it. Okay. They say that the U.S. doesn't want you to do it. I'll make a counterclaim. The U.S. loves you taking over. Why? Couple of reasons. 1, you absorb the political risk. When a soldier dies on the ground in Mogadishu, the U.S. fucking pulls out. But now, when a Kuwaiti soldier dies, the U.S. still gets money. 1. 2, it's not like when they take over, suddenly the largest trading partner after China with all of these countries is going to charge the U.S. a lot. If anything, knowing the fact that they're willing to cooperate with you on this mission, they could just do the counterclaim, but also say we'll give you great royalties. We'll protect your ships when they go in. The fact that no ships can be insured right now will give you a sweet deal. Insurance that is subsidized rates that State Farm would fucking blush at. It was ridiculous for them to say that the U.S. just wants to take over these things. If you think the GCC has this line incentives, oh boy, meet fucking Congress. 2 questions. First, on solvency. Couple of things. Sorry, that's it. After whatever. Why can we do this and why will it work? Great, just please pay attention to listen to me, no friendly. 1, CO says you don't have boats. Question this stuff. Pepsi has the 8th largest navy in the world because they need to protect their shipments. And these guys think that MBS hasn't built one fucking warship to protect its oil tankers. very skeptical about that. Two, you need a permission structure here, right? Like the reason that the US hasn't done this already is because they don't want to piss you off, because it turns out it's actually very important that when you're one of the largest providers of the supply chain, that you don't just do something that affects the sovereignty of all of these countries. When you say, hey, we want to take it over, we want you to send ships to help us, and we'll give you a sweet deal later, the US says yes, because it's your lives on the line, but they get all of the profit. It is very unclear, just like they need to prove a market of how much more money the US is going to get, because they're the ones owning this, suggesting that we do have the ships to do it, even if you buy the CEO assertion that none of these countries have ships. Three, it just is like a self-defense claim in a way that your allies will want to support. They say international rule of law. Nas told you in PM that a fucking hotel was exploded by response to Iran, and these guys say, no, man, how are you going to justify this? Why would anyone help you out? The US has done this historically all the time. We went into Kuwait, guns fucking blazing, and still let them run their own shit because we knew we wanted to be allies with Kuwait, not take over Kuwait when Saddam Hussein went in. And these guys think that the US is going to be like, I don't know about this, guys. We really don't want you to take over this thing. Absolutely foolish. That's the question of votes. Two, they say negotiations. All the responses they gave you earlier apply. Three, they say the US needs to back you. I will explain why it is that the US is going to back you for the reasons I gave. But even if they don't, there are other people who are your other buyers who want you to do it. It's very unclear why it is that the US is going to be willing to like piss China off to that degree. So the second thing I want to do is explain the long-term existential risks to you for every day you don't do something. That is that you are able to do the policy we are prescribing right now. The counterfactual that was very weakly modeled by LO, I don't know when it works, I don't know how long it works, I really don't know how many ships the US is going to be willing to support here because Congress needs to approve it. And as Nas told you, every day you don't do this, there are two existential risks. Well, two new ones I would provide. One, China's already looking to alternatives. If you look at the fucking economists, you will see that they're looking to other allies who provide the oil, countries in West Africa and things like this, also alternatives, which means you don't want them to leave you because you are a desperate country. Two, your tourism is also destroying. All of your industries are correlated with one another. So if you don't have oil, all the other diversification you want to do can't happen. Yeah.
Who controls the straits right now, and what's your plan to get rid of all the Iranian installations along this narrow passage?
Yeah, well, we're just gonna like blow them up and rebuild. Like I don't fucking know, guys. Like, yeah, Iran owns it right now, but for all the reasons Nas gave you, this is the weakest they'll ever be. And if you buy the OO claim that you do nothing now, I think there'll be a lot more collateral damage in the counterfactual and everyone's fighting the Strait of Hormuz. Or two, it is likely the case that the US blows all the shit up and takes it over and then like really fucks you over here. Like and like or Iran keeps it, that's also potential counterfactual because like they win the war. Like I really don't know what you want me to say here, guys. Cool. Long-term existential risks. The point here is that there's an urgency play here, right? Like, if you think their plan is slightly better than ours, but takes considerably longer, that means that even when it succeeds, the Strait of Hormuz is a much less valuable commodity to you because you have less money so that you weren't able to do things like support the diversification programs that MBS wants. Because China, who normally was buying $100 billion of oil, is now only buying $50 billion because the other $50 billion is taken up by other countries, suggesting that there's an urgency claim here. So even if they are right, you're able to get more money because the US is going to like take levies from each thing that goes through and like your per dollar day of what you get from the Strait of Hormuz is lower. That is vastly outweighed by the fact that your economy is just fucking collapsed. And in order you do not do something about the Strait of Hormuz now, vote us.
Would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I welcome the deputy leader of opposition. And somebody,
So let me get one thing straight, because I think I'm a little confused. So if the U.S. tries to take over, it's crazy, it's the largest land grabs, it's the Louisiana Purchase. But when the ragtag GCC with their non-existent Navy comes in before and takes it over, that is somehow going to be the best operation of all time and will lead to long-term stability in the region. A few reasons why this isn't the case. I want to frame whose interests are actually in having the Strait of Hormuz be international waters. That is, right now, the individuals who are suffering from the closure are the ones who buy oil from the Gulf states and have contributed to the Strait of Hormuz. The Strait of Hormuz does not go to North America. The Strait of Hormuz goes to Russia and China. They're the ones who are suffering. So when Deputy comes up and says, China will intervene to prevent a U.S. intervention from happening in the first place, why would they do that? They're doing that to make it more expensive for themselves in the short term and the long term. I think they'd be quite happy, and the U.S. interest would align if there was a clearing out, which means the international community is likely to rally around a joint clearing out. But then the GCC comes in and says, thanks, guys. I'm glad you're helping us defeat the Iranian Navy, but once you leave, we're going to take it over permanently. I don't see a reason why the powers like China and Russia would not retaliate to that. why in the long term, if you take over the avenue that they have towards getting oil from Iran, from other Gulf states from which they might purchase, then they would not care about that. Presumably, there's retaliation. I'll get to the backing of that later. There are essentially 4 reasons why you're not able to actually get the results you want from opening government. Firstly, there is no capacity for you to win this war and take control. They have bad navies. They say Pepsi has the 8th largest navy in the world. Pepsi's not in the GCC. These Gulf states, which have, as conceded, relied on U.S. loan ships and U.S. military bases for about 100 years, meaning that they have never had any capacity or incentive or whatever other big burden you want to make their own militaries or have their own navies because the U.S. guaranteed support. Which means, in order to do this, if the U.S. is not doing it for them, which is our counter model, you need to finance your own military operations, purchase your ships. You know what this isn't? It's not quick. It's not these short-term resolutions that Dennis wants. It is not something you can do overnight. That means you have to build up your capacity to defeat Iran in a naval war, which has a fully developed navy, versus you, who has no developed navy. So, you're not going to win on that front. Secondly, you will not get the U.S. assistance to do this. As in, the U.S. probably has the incentive to do it in the way that they will do it in the counterfactual, which is clear out the Iranian presence, but return it to international waters, which is what Kay Boon says, not the U.S. will take it over and then control it as they control Louisiana. Why are international waters preferable? First of all, it is just lower cost, as in there is no built-in price of paying for the security guarantees that lead to control the water, as in it is not just enough to say you nominally control the water, you have to actually be these ships monitoring it, and that also means you charge a little bit for passing through there, as Canada does, as every single country that owns a strait of water does. Otherwise, you cannot finance it. Secondly, the U.S. military presence in the region creates a power dynamic shift, which means that the U.S. military, which currently controls the security of the Strait of Hormuz, now can contend with these new presences of the GCC control, which are outside their operational remit, and they probably want individuals in control who are within their operational remit. Therefore, they probably won't support this deal. They say it allows them to absorb the human cost of warfare. But presumably, since the U.S. ships are the only ships that actually support the Gulf states in the region right then they probably have to absorb the human cost when these ragtag GCC ships go out there and get sunk to the bottom of the ocean. It's probably the U.S. ships fishing people out of the water in that circumstance when they go out on a futile mission to control this. I also want to note, what Kay Boon frames to you is that the geopolitical ambitions of the U.S. right now perceive this as a zero-sum game. As in, Donald Trump sees it as a concession if it's the case that the GCC now controls the Strait of Hormuz, which the U.S. has always postured as being the operational authority in. Therefore, you are likely on the counterfactual to have a resolution to the short-term harm, as in every day you're losing a bunch of oil, because the international community probably wants this to happen anyway. It would take too long for them to do it in the way in which they model. Third, there will be counter-funding from Russia and China, insofar as Iran is their direct political ally in the region, and it is them that you have to fight and kill to take control of this region. Insofar as they purchase their oil from Iran, they probably want access to Iran through the Strait of Hormuz, which means they will do 2 things. They will impose incredible sanctions upon you. Presumably, they will not actually purchase continually your oil and will look for different supply chains, which means that you lose out on a huge amount of money because of financial harm to yourself. Secondly, they will just fund the Iranian Navy and the Iranian military. Note this doesn't just require massive warships, but the kind of things that Iran does to make things confusing in the Strait of Hormuz are things like GPS scrambling, using drone strikes on smaller scale ships, which means that these are things that are actually quite cheap and can be done with a low cost, even while Iran is engaged in other military fronts, even while China and Russia contribute minimally. It means they can do a lot of damage and make it in case other people want to fly different supply routes, such as the Red Sea, such as, I don't know, shipping over the Pacific to places like the oil sands in Alberta, as things that are lower cost when they make it too high cost as a result. Probably you will have to either succumb to the pressure or have a worse version of their impact, which is every single day you lose oil. That will continue to happen as long as your purchasers no longer want you to have that. Yeah.
What's the GCC stance on Yemen?
I don't know. Yemen is a Gulf state. I suppose it kind of is. I sort of assumed that Yemen was in the GCC, but I don't really know. Organizational incompetence. The question on this are people. First of all, in an organization like the GCC, Dennis said it's great. They have the WBC constitution. It's so long. That makes it harder to have operational. Who people die in these operations? Does Saudi Arabia send their soldiers to die? Does Bahrain send their soldiers to die? Whose people die? Probably no one wants it to be theirs. Therefore, operations are slow and hard to approve. Secondly, these stages of approval you have to go through are probably quite significant too, because there's no quick deployment, because every single Gulf state has different interests, has different sovereign wealth funds, differing suppliers they use. Therefore, you're going to have a lot of disagreement and an inability to organize around one kind of quick response, means you don't get the quick and brutal destruction of the Iranian military that they need. Let's impact this. First, in terms of costs, ships cost a lot of money. That means that there's a lot of money out of your budget. Secondly, there's a loss of life. You are engaging in a hot war with Iran without support from your international allies, which means that individuals on the ground die, and they crucially probably buy out of your regime and buy out of the GCC and want to operate on themselves because they don't want to be the ones whose people are dying. Third, there are shifts to different supply routes, as in, if there becomes a hot conflict in Strait of Hormuz, that extends the period in which there is no ability for civilian tankers to go through. So they shift towards other supply chains and build them up over these days or years. You go to the Red Sea, you go to other suppliers, these sanctions probably also force you to do that as they start them up as well. Let's compare this to the status quo. If you are attacked, they say you're attacked by Iran if you have a joint U.S. operation in any case. But there's a crucial difference between aiding the U.S. and raising a whole navy out of nowhere and engaging in a hot war. That probably means the comparative is a situation in which you're able to wait this out at minimal cost to yourself while you allow your international allies to do this. I also want to note, Gulf states are not universally beloved. So your opposition is severe. It is China, it is Russia, it is probably also the U.S. insofar as restricted security guarantees to them, which means that you will have to give up in the long term. You will be sanctioned, you will be fought against, and this is a pure civil war.
I'd like to speaker for that fine speech. Thank you, Tata, for a much funnier Tata than I was expecting when I emotion. With that, welcome the member of government here.
Closing government is going to argue that this is an operation that, even if in the long term fails, or it doesn't really work out exactly as opening government plans, is something that will unify the GCC, which is something that will prevent the possibility of them all engaging in like funding different sides of a potential proxy conflict in Iran, and then generally being unified, which is really important for various different projects that they have, like economic integration on things like tourism, like potentially not continuing to spend billions and billions in Yemen, and all of these sorts of things. First, I want to explain why Iran is incredibly likely to become a protracted conflict, unlike the quick, like 1 week in and out, Tehran's down, we're done, guys, that top Trump is promising, and apparently both opening teams seem to believe. This is important, as I'll explain later for more reasons, but for one, it means that opening opposition can't just claim that we're going to go in there, we're going to clear it up, and then it's done, because there's going to be no more Iran to continue bombing. Well, actually, there will be, for a few reasons. First, even when the regime falls, you have to understand that this is a regime that's been preparing for, the prospect of war against Israel and the US and so on for literally decades. And what that means is they have like splinter cells all across rural Iran, which is, by the way, mostly like mountainous and incredibly difficult to fight in. And what that means is that these guys are going to continue fighting. These guys are going to continue having access to like supply, stockpiles and so on of like the 20K, basically incredibly cheap drones that they have. And so they will continue to have the capacity to engage in strikes with Hormuz, continue fighting within Iran for power, etc. Secondly, you need to understand that like mostly the most religious fanatics that exist in Iran, most like loyal IRGC soldiers, exist primarily in the rural parts of Iran. Those, unlike like Tehran, which is generally more kind of progressive, more like middle class and so on, in Iranian terms. And what that means is that those in the rural parts of Iran are going to continue fighting for a lot longer. So even if you're able, as the US said yes, to capture Tehran, you're going to continue having a very protracted conflict there. This is important because it's likely that many different factions emerge for a variety of reasons. Iran is a relatively, there are many different kinds of groups and minorities that exist, so that's one possibility. Moreover, it's likely that there's some successionary crisis over the next Ayatollah, where some person or some group thinks that I was the successor, and the other person thinks that they're the successor, and that can cause issues, obviously. And moreover, you probably have situations where the leaders of the cells have an incentive to portray themselves as, even if there's not that much kind of reasonable grounding in their claim to be the next Ayatollah or the next leader, the leaders themselves have an incentive to claim that in order to preserve their power, because otherwise they'll just be subsumed by some other cell. All of this means that this is going to be a clusterfuck, right? You're going to have a very long, as happened in Iraq, as happened in Syria, very long kind of protracted conflict. What's the implication of this? Firstly, if you believe opening government, that you are in fact able to hold on to the Straits of Hormuz for long term, we massively expand their margin. Why? Their case is that, well, it's currently unstable, we stabilize it. So we benefit for like a month of additional stability, which otherwise would have been unstable, or like 2 months, 3 months, whatever. We explain that this is going to be like a 7-year conflict, 10-year conflict, all throughout you're going to have instability. So being able to stabilize it gives us all of those benefits throughout the period. Secondly, and this is crucial, this is an additional important reason, and like I guess standalone reason towards opening government gives you, as to why the US is likely to support you in having permanent control. Because opening opposition suggests we go and clear them out and then it's international waters again. Well, if you try that, the US knows, as you know, I guess we know, that this is going to be a protracted conflict and therefore won't support that kind of policy, but they will be more in favor of a policy that maintains permanent control and therefore can provide permanent stability to, like, I guess, guard against what we expect to be long-term instability. So that's, I guess, the importance of that. The next element I want to explain is as to why it is, in the absence of an event that significantly unifies the GCC, it's likely that they take different sides within the ensuing proxy conflict that will exist in Iran, and then I'll explain why this can be the unifying event. Why is it the case that in the absence, they're probably going to support different proxy sides? This is exactly what happened in Yemen, right? Like to the T, basically. And to be clear, the reasons for this is that different factions emerge, right? And essentially, as one of these countries, you want to back the next winner, right? And the reason for that is because obviously Iran is important. It's important geographically, which partly because of the Strait of Hormuz, partly because it's very nearby you, and so you don't want to have instability there. You want to have a good relationship with the person who's won the kind of civil conflict that exists. You don't want to have terrorists spilling over, and so on and so forth. You don't want to have like refugee flows and so on. All of this means that you want to support the winning side. Problem is, you have different perceptions of what the winning side is. You probably have different initial relationships that mean that you're more like, more likely to create relationships with different groups initially. And there's no clear winner, at least in the beginning. And therefore, you all are likely to end up supporting different sides. You may say, well, they all have a shared incentive in keeping Iran stable. So why don't they all coordinate and support the same side? Well, that's very difficult because that's basically a prisoner's dilemma. You have to rely on the other and trust the other side. Trust, as Qatar, you have to trust Bahrain or the Saudi Arabia or whatever, to support the same person as you and to not secretly support someone else. And that's very difficult to do when you have a track record of not having done that, right? And when you know that the other person has an overriding incentive to back the winners and have a good relationship with them. All of it means, in the absence of a unifying event, you're likely to have a proxy conflict. And this is bad. No. Why do we break this? Why is it very unifying? Firstly, because you create a shared interest that you're working towards. That's to say, you all have a very large sunk cost in what you planted in the Strait of Hormuz. And therefore, you have a very strong incentive to continue paying back essentially that sunk cost. And so the try of deviating from that and breaking your alliance by starting to fund someone else is massively more important because it's your warships getting bombed, it's your people dying. Totally.
Yeah, so status quo is a de facto sort of US-led counterbalance to Iranian control of the Strait of Hormuz. Why is that not preferable to return to the US as compared to GCC controls out of the region?
Because Iran is going to fall into a huge proxy conflict, so you can't just call it international waters, go in once a month to clear it up and call it a day, because they're going to be continuous drones fires at any ships that go through, as I've explained. Let's get more reasons, I guess, as to why this unifies the GCC. The second reason is that you're going to have sharing of intelligence, of military intelligence, which is necessary in order to conduct the military operation that you're undertaking. This is important because it means that other countries will know things like some of your troop deployments, some of these systems that you use, and can threaten to leak those, for example, if you start supporting a different side in the proxy conflict. And what that means is that increases the cost of you doing that by very, very much, because if now the Houthis know what you're how you deploy troops in that region, that's probably really bad for you. They can inflict a lot of damage on you. Thirdly, and importantly, and I think this may sound trivial, but ultimately these are the people who make the decisions. I just think that genuinely the diplomats and the head of state become much closer. They actually work on things together. They understand each other better, and on the human level, they trust each other more, and so they can cooperate better with future. What's the importance of this? You may not think that the probability of the proxy war is 100%. Maybe it's a lot lower than that. But it's a really, really bad outcome. It will cost you billions in the future. And so reducing that probability by a lot is incredibly important.
My time speaker with that final speech and a member of opposition. You're here.
Right?
Yeah.
There's a very subtle thing that Dennis said in his speech that everyone kind of glosses over, which is that if you do this, the US puts the responsibility of blocking the Strait of Hormuz on you, which, if you take a step back, that's fucking crazy, right? I mean, your profits are getting squandered. Thanks for the numbers now. Because some orange guy was like, I want to liberate Iran, and now you have to take the responsibility for freeing your profits? Now, when Kay Boon finished his speech, my first thought was, shit, there goes my extensions. But in running CO, I realized they missed the OO case, which largely is going to be very simple. Iran will bomb the shit out of Jeddah, Doha, Muscat, Bahrain, and everything in between. This is really, really bad. Firstly, why is the bombing low and fine right now? So there is an economic cost, but the human cost is fairly low and will remain fairly low in CG's protracted case. Firstly, a lot of the countries have not openly declared war as a consequence of this. Why? One, a lot of these countries just tend to have relatively good relations. So Oman tends to be a relatively middle actor. Bahrain tends to be a relatively middle actor. And they can relatively glib about their stance because they're also not the ones facing large portions of retaliation from Iran. Second, the fact that Israel is the one doing the war muddies the water for these countries as well. Because a lot of these countries don't really want to work with Israel. And as a consequence, are willing to come to the negotiating table in comparison to engaging in this war. But also contrary to this being something you can unify, which if you listen to like Leo a bit carefully, is just fiat. Saudi Arabia doesn't actually benefit massively one way or another from freeing up the Strait of Hormuz because the Gulf of Aden is on the other side, guys. The Gulf of Aden is the way that LNG is primarily exported from Saudi Arabia. Maz mentions pipelines. Where do those pipelines go? Think about it first. So the cost of war has actually not been pretty significant for the Saudis, and as a consequence of that, they've not also been facing a significant amount of retaliation from Iran. Second, the war kicked off much faster than expected. So the bombing Iran is doing right now, because obviously they will be like, we saw a missile hit UAE, is one of two things. One, it is very low level, small scale, short range missiles that it is just using to show that it can spread chaos. But if you look at the civilian tolls have been very, very low. As a consequence of these bombings, happening largely in night. Because what Iran is just trying to do is just put international pressure, right? It's trying to make people come to the negotiating table and not actually just start a war and inadvertently lead to retaliation. Two, it is targeted strikes on U.S. assets within the country. So it's targeted strikes, for example, to the embassy in Abu Dhabi, as opposed to random hospitals in Abu Dhabi on their side of the house. But the civilian cost has been low because Iran knows that there is a good chance that these countries, in the face of chaos, which it has been able to show, put international pressure on the USA. Firstly, they mentioned Yemen. That's the thing for our side. The Saudis and UAE are cooperating less as a consequence of the splinter that happened in Yemen. As a consequence of that, like if you're able to put pressure on one or the other, you can use them against each other to like bring them to the negotiation table, and it is working, right? And look at what the UAE said very recently, like 2 days ago, in terms of where they are and the fact that they want this war to end. Saudi, as I mentioned, is not affected by this war very significantly as well. So it is very happy to put pressure or not put pressure and not cooperate with the other states that they try to fiat in. But if the war is protracted, which PG says, this is exactly why Iran can no longer continue the bombings, because it now has to focus inwards, right? So its current strategy of bombing random third-party actors becomes less and less and less likely each year the war passes on. And as a consequence, and the bottom line of all of this is that, yes, in our world there have been some bombings, but these are highly strategic bombings, and they are successfully building international pressure to end the war. As a consequence of this, if the war is protracted and the war doesn't end, these bombings stop, and you never actually just lose civilians. So that is the comparative. The first time I looked at the comparative first. Second, what changes on our side of the house? First of all, this is, by all accounts, an open declaration of war. Like, I'm glad they want to use their fiat and magic cooperation, because that cooperation that goes against every fiber of the Iranian strategy. Now in Iran, that was just originally using low-level bombings and maintaining a lot of its assets to continue to fight a protracted war, immediately needs to use its advantages to deter you as fast as possible. It needs to make sure that this declaration of war is treated as such, and especially in a world where people on the streets celebrating the fact that the Ayatollah died, it cannot back down. It cannot weaken, and it needs to store strength to a very significant extent. So what are the advantages that Iran will now use and deploy on your fucking people when they wouldn't have done this previously? Firstly, they have a huge amount of short-range missiles that are used that they stockpile. And the structural reason for this is that when you want to have standoffs between Saudi Arabia and Iran and things like that, the most thing that you invested in the most was these short-range missiles. So the capacity you have to engage in these bombings is incredibly high. Second, Iran, much more than any of these countries, contrary to what they say, even if you add them up, spends way more of its GDP on the military, way more of its GDP on the military. The reason for this is that, unlike these other countries, it is not as much of a dictator's argument. It uses its military force to a far more significant extent. So as a consequence of that, it also has much stronger defense, anti-air missiles, things like that, which these countries fundamentally don't. And so eventually these countries will benefit, crumble, and these bombings will work successfully. But three, Iran uses a decentralized strategy in terms of how it allows its forces to operate. So even if you don't piss off all the forces, some of the more crazed generals are going to be like, let's launch the fucking missiles, right? Let's launch our long-range missiles. Let's put everything on these evil, like, other sect of Muslim people, so we can punish them to a far greater extent. So the conclusion of all of this is comparatively, we don't get bombings. On their side, we do get bombings. Sure.
Dude, the United States has destroyed 90% of Iran's missile launchers, and all of the missiles that they've wasted that we keep shooting out of the sky.
Not true, man.
Just
Bro,
produce them.
I get it. You have the economist. I don't know that was allowed, by the way. Even if it is allowed, like, I read a counter article in the Atlantic. That's these sort of missile stuff that still applies. The second one I want to do is like build the comparative a little bit better, which is why the Strait of Hormuz opens up a mention. So this will make it even easier for you to weigh the economic cost with the cost of war, even if it wasn't easy enough to set fucking people that, right? First of all, the protection of the war doesn't actually need much for the Strait of Hormuz, because that's kind of independent, right, to the war that is happening within Iran itself. So like, they can prove that the war happens for 7 or 10 years. That's not going to be a reason for why they would open, like, eventually have to divert their Navy forces towards like the other side to prevent the US Navy from coming in. So like, you wouldn't be able to carry on the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz forever. So like, I don't know if the protraction of war is actually a good thing, maybe CG. But second, I can't believe they say this. China and India are pissed that their LNG is not coming to them. They're also like neutral actors that have broadly been supportive of you. What are they going to do if they keep not getting LNG? They'll be like, open up the Strait of Hormuz and we'll continue to support you. So eventually the Strait of Hormuz probably will open up. The weighing for us at the end of the day is very simple. Like, yeah, exactly. They're not in defense. I guess they agree with us. The weighing at the end of the day is very simple. The cost of war is far greater than the economic cost that they can prove, and the economic cost of these investments.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech, and I want the government whip here.
So the tragedy of the commons is a very observed phenomenon. When common resources are destroyed beyond where it makes sense for any individual actor, because the actors lack the ability to coordinate on how to reuse that resource. The exact same principle applies to peace in the Middle East. All of the countries would benefit if they didn't all fund different sides in Yemen. But because of their inability to coordinate, they destroy a country and destroy the stability of oil supply chains and waste billions, billions, and billions. The way we create coordination is very simple. Leo explained. I'd also like to add that the creation of a massive common threat, that's what Soh says, is a massive big incentive to coordinate because you're more afraid of them, which is an additional reason if you accept the worst case of their case. But there's also a more severe and faster retaliatory mechanism in intelligence. Now let's say deviation from coordination occurs when you think you can get away with deviating, which means you can get your cake and eat it too. Coordinate with the others on management of Strait of Hormuz and fund a militia in Iran so you can have a head start there. When you know they have more intelligence than you, when you know they understand your troop movements a lot more, when they have more cooperation in other things, when more of your research are tied up, you can't do that as much, which means your incentive to deviate decreases a lot. What is the very important implication of this analysis? We do not and we cannot let what happened in Yemen, Syria, Iraq happen in Iran, because it means to be an escalation of the likely civil war. And mind you, they say it might have happened, but guys, every other place where you killed the leader, the US went in, had limited political will, as I said, and then fucked right off, led to a civil war. So there was like a crisis of sorts, and that crisis massively escalates when different actors in the Arab world want to support different factions in that crisis. And the implication of this is very important because it means that under their side, you probably can't coordinate and you're also supporting different militias, different sides. The difference is very important. Under our side, when you're coordinated, at the very least for the next year or two things happen. A, you might either support a common side if someone is like Pakistan supporting someone else. At the very least, there are two sides which are more manageable and you can coordinate your resources together. But second of all, even if cooperation fails in 2 years, that is after the civil war has passed its first stage, which means it's not 10 actors, there might be 2 actors, which means the intensity and how sporadic the conflict is decreases. And this is a very important implication of the Strait of Hormuz, because having a variety of radical extremists many of the Islamists, is very dangerous for the Strait of Hormuz. They're likely to do the exact same things people do in Somalia, the pirates, and the Houthis do in Yemen. This is all the same. This happens next door and next door. So why wouldn't it happen here? And have a variety of reasons to do this. First of all, there are Islamic radicals. Many of these people hate capitalism. Many of these people are for anti-Semitic and think oil ships are controlled by Israel and the Jewish community, which is why they want to strike them. This just happens empirically. Second, it's a show of strength. They want to apply pressure in a negotiation structure. They want to show why you not agreeing with them is very problematic for your economic activity, which means they have they have an obvious incentive to strike oil investments, scare away investment, etc. And this starts responding to closing opposition. It's much easier to strike oil investment than it is to strike a fucking country, because an oil investment is closer to you and not defend it. Here, let's engage with closing opposition. If you ignore the POI opening government aspect, closing opposition, they're going to bomb you more. At 11:35 today, they sent 200 fucking drones to attack desalination plants. That is the water, aka the thing you drink, aka the thing you die without. This was in the Associated Press, which I think trumps both of their publications. And also in my case time, which I think trumps all three. And the reason why they do this is that it's the only way they can hurt America and apply any pressure for it, which means they're likely to continue doing it as the war escalates. Second, if the war becomes a civil war, as we identified, we think they have an asymmetric ability to bomb your merchant ships, but not the ability to bomb your countries individually, which means opening opposition might identify the incentive to bomb you, but not the ability to do so. Why? The way bombing works in these countries is you send enough missiles that you overwhelm their sort of air defense capacities, which means you sort of can actually start striking things. The difference is that when a civil war happens and the missile silos are split, none of the individual militias have enough missiles to overwhelm the air defense systems, and absent coordination mechanism, they can't actually do this, which means they can only strike small things, aka the oil investments in the Strait of Hormuz, which is why you need this sort of operation to protect you there, but it doesn't have the impact it has on bombing you directly, which what closing opposition has their case on. So I don't think closing opposition proves a meaningful impact there. The major threat to you is not your own, the major threat which changes in this debate is not your cities, not your desalination plants. This happens regardless and probably not as Iran destabilizes the main problem in the Strait of Hormuz. How do they then engage with opening opposition? They have a couple of random queries. First is diplomatic backlash. China wants stability. They don't want to upset their actors and their friends. If it needs stability, they will not fuck it up. This is obvious. Russia and Egypt don't give a shit because none of their oil comes through that. Duh. Second, they say no US. And you can say, the US might not want this. Guys, I did some thinking. I'm like, do we need the US? No, we need Trump. What's happening to Trump? He bribed him. Qatar has already done this by giving him billions worth of jets. And he's massively in charge of things. Congress is sucking his dick in terms of this. They didn't block any of the things he did. Second of all, it's easy for Trump to frame this as part of an agreement, maybe for the Abraham Accords, maybe it's part of some broader settlement, and for him to get the W's of being a cool deal maker, which means he's likely to support this in the way of opening government. There are new and independent responses. Lastly, on your ability to do this. It's very simple, right? Like NATO has done this with the Houthis. Greece was involved there, and we are way more fucking inept than those guys. Because the nature of conflict is small asymmetric things, small boats with people with Kalashnikovs, small missiles which you don't need incredibly advanced systems to stop. So it is a rather feasible thing, and that is something uniquely our extension explained. Opening.
Okay, so you couldn't stop the pirate in Yemen, Somalia, or any of these places. So your burden is even higher than Cody's to show capacity that you stop all of this from happening and stop the people in jail state.
First of all, no, because it's empirical reality, so that burden applies for both of us. Second of all, you were able to stop the pirates. Like once they sent in an operation in 2011, Somali pirates dropped like 98% because shocking, big army can climb out some little guys with boats. For a variety of reasons. How do they explain opening government? First of all, our framing as to why Iran is likely to stabilize this means that the dealing with the Strait of Hormuz becomes a lot more manageable because they misidentify the threat. It's not an organized Iranian army, it is likely sporadic militias, which are a lot easier to deal with. It is a sort of asymmetric conflict you're already used to engaging with, which means it's a lot easier to do both because the enemy is smaller and you have direct experience in this. And you also already have things like missile defense systems for your own defense. Second of all, we expect much bigger impacts. If Iran destabilizes because you give up a lot of weapons there, they might do other things. They might do a remote attack. They might actually attack you a lot more and have other destabilizing impacts in the region. And given the main impact they want is stability in the region. And in the Strait of Hormuz, we meaningfully add that proposed.
I would like to thank the speaker for that fine speech and close the debate. I welcome opposition whites.
The biggest impact in the round that you as the leaders of the GCC care about is not your vastly deep-pocketed sovereign wealth fund losing a bit of money over the next couple of weeks. Is that a missile might drop on your head, on your palace. Our extension wins the round. We explain that Iran will retaliate on you when you literally declare war on them. We get responses from both teams. OG says in a POI, the US have destroyed all these missiles because trust me, bro. First, no, watch the news. Even if it's not missiles, like drones are flying into hotels. We've all watched that reel of the missile dropping on the street in Qatar and people running away. The guy who keeps his camera and shows himself smiling at the missile. I think why he knows that people's flights are literally getting cancelled because there are missiles landing every single day. Two, structural reason. It's really hard to destroy all the missiles because they're very decentralized. They're all over Iran. They're all over the coastline. They're owned by different militias, as Max says. So you can't destroy all of them. Third, it's pretty easy to build. These are short-range missiles, not nukes. And fourth, Russia and China have lots of them that they want to sell to you because they want you to fuck up the US things. That's OG out of the way. Max gives other responses. The first thing he says is it's easy to strike oil vessels. First, according to these teams, there aren't oil vessels there because the strait is closed. So clearly what you are going to attack is the cities. Has that been happening in status quo? Secondly, Max, oil vessels move. They're very hard to get. The second response is that this is still part of our case. If Iran retaliates by striking your oil vessels, that's still bad. Still, we don't want this retaliation to happen. This is literally also an impact on our case. Next response from Max. You have no ability to do this if there's a civil war. Sure, let's take them at their best. Let's assume that there's a civil war happening. All the militias can still fire individually and overwhelm your air defenses because each missile you shoot down is you have one less ammunition of the thing you shoot it down with. You don't need to be coordinated. But secondly, these countries aren't Israel. They don't have the Iron Dome. Their air defenses aren't that good because they don't get bombed very often, right? So these countries are going to be very easily going to be overwhelmed even by initial militias. The last response, classic Max. It happens anyway. It's already happening. Guys, what's already happening? One missile, one hotel in Bahrain. It is going to happen so much more. The margin is going to increase. We don't want Iran to start targeting civilians. It can always get way, way worse. And it happens when you literally declare war on them. I think this extension is standing in the round and is really important. How do we win over opening opposition? I think the big part of opening opposition is that they don't know how to bite the bullet. They assert a counter model, the US will just do this for you, and that's why they keep coming back to us as a response. But as the Gov teams point out, the justification they give as to why the US will do this for you is incredibly shaky, especially if Rob says that the strait being closed harms Russia and China. Surely that's good for the US. Surely that harms their own justification as to why the US will do this for you. We are the team on the off bench that bite the bullet. We say, fine, the strait stays closed for a little bit longer. That's better than getting bombed. It's better than losing power because your people are getting bombed. It's better than having airstrikes on your house because Iran wants to retaliate against you. We are the team that proved that this trade-off is worth it. Let's talk about the gov bench. Opening government's main winning ground is that you need the straits to be open to get your oil out and get your money. First response, this is the worst way to do this because now the straits become a war zone. Nothing gets through when you are literally fighting in the strait. Listen to the language of OG. We will take all the missiles and we'll bomb the shit out of them. That's really bad getting any oil through. You know why? Oil is really flammable. All the oil is gone. You aren't going to get any money. You're not going to get any oil on this side when it becomes a war zone. Second response, this relies on you winning the war because it's not obviously it stays close. The biggest threat from them is that you likely wanted to do this for a while. No, because the common perception is that if anyone was going to do this, it is the US. Then it says you want to defend your warships. The US is currently defending your oil tankers. Also, I want to make strong man my POI, right? My rebuttal isn't they have zero boats. My rebuttal is their boats are weaker than the Iranian ones. And that's the big missing burden from OG. We agree with them. You probably have some boats, but it's not proven why they're stronger and able to overwhelm the Iranian navy that has been preparing for this for far longer with a far greater military spending. And without that missing burden, genuinely, what do OG have? They don't prove any margin of success. Third, let's ignore all that. Let's be super charitable. At best, these harms don't last long because as Tanush explains to no response, Iran needs to open the strait for their own oil to get out. That is by volume the greatest proportion of oil that goes through the strait, Iran's own oil. And especially if it's a protracted conflict, especially if they need to sustain a war effort, they need their primary source of income. They need to get their own oil up, and that's why they open it in the future. Moreover, Dennis gives you another reason. Allies like China want the strait open. They need oil. They have leverage over Iran because they sell them weapons. That is why in history, the strait has never been closed for that long. This is not in any way a permanent harm. For these countries, which are super rich, have insane reserves, have vastly wealthy sovereign wealth funds, waiting it out for a little while until Iran needs their own oil is not a comparable harm to the risk of massive retaliation. This isn't an urgency claim from opening government. I think our case is far more important. Before I go to CG, yes.
Yeah, unfortunately, you're bound by OO's counterprop where the US turns it into a fucking war zone anyway. The question is, do you want it to be a massive power vacuum where all the GCC countries fight over it, or for our model, they put together?
Yeah, bro, but you gave the response that the US won't do it. I believe you did. Let's talk about closing government. The first aim of CG is that Iran conflict will be protracted. Okay, the strait can't remain closed for 10 years because Iran needs to fund their war effort. China and Russia need it open. The protracted conflict actually increases, I agree with you, Leo. The protracted conflict increases the margin of our case because the retaliations, the bombings last for 7 to 10 years instead of 2 to 3 months. That is a far greater margin of harm for closing opposition. The better case from CG is that the GCC will now be united and they weren't in the past. First, the reasons that Leo gives are reasons why you won't put in a large sum cost and won't share intelligence, just in case later you want to pull out and back the winning horse. Government has fiat that they will start the war effort now, but you do not have fiat long into the future. So when soldiers start dying and the Qataris are like, yo, MBS, can we get a RIA? He'll say, no, I don't trust you because you fought me on Yemen. No, I don't trust you because I don't want to share my intelligence. No, we don't trust each other because we have fought in the past. So we don't get this coordination long into the future. Second, flip, which worsens coordination. Leo's method is like, you understand each other on a human level. The leaders of the GCC countries are not nice guys. If you put them all in a room, they especially when their soldiers start dying, when their populations are threatened them to stop sending their sons into battle, that is when they don't understand each other on a human level. They are far, far worse. Third, the final flip. The common threat actually works against them. If there's a common threat, you want to dip out of the war earliest, so you stop getting bombed, and everyone else continues getting bombed, which means that this is not a comment that they unite them, it's a comment that makes these people individually deviate. Guys, don't get bombed. What's you?
Speaker for that fine speech, and I thank everybody else one more time for a fantastic semi-final. Please stop recording.